Good afternoon, colleagues. Imina 35 na legislature in Guam is back from recess. When we last left, we were working with Senator Clinton Rangel and the author of the bill. So right now, I'll recognize you, Senator Clint. I think you have an amendment. Is it uploaded?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a couple of amendments uploaded. So the first amendment I have is to line 15 through 18 of page 3,
Yes.
and it's to amend section 7010(1)D of the bill to read, good animal husbandry includes, but is not limited to, the dehorning of cattle, the docking of horses, sheep, or swine, and the castration or neutering of livestock, or the ear cropping and tail docking of dogs, according to accepted practices of veterinary medicine or animal husbandry,
And
to allow for legal counsel to make technical corrections.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak on the amendment? Are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Clinton, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have one more amendment. After discussing with the author, taking a look at line 12 of page 17. Now, this is in the defense and exceptions portion where it talks about all the different exceptions to the proposed law. And on number 4, so it's section 701011G4 is amended to read, the proper disinfestation of rodents, and this is the part that my amendment adds, is the following words, and brown tree snakes. So all it would add is just to ensure that brown tree snakes are included in allowable disinfestation practices.
Thank you, Senator Ruggiero. On that amendment, are there anyone wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Senator Ruggiero. Anyone else on the main motion? I'm sorry, Senator Ruggiero, you still have the floor. I apologize.
No problem, Madam Speaker. I have no further amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. On the main motion, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Parrish, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have 3 amendments being sent to the clerks right now, so I'll just give them a moment to receive them.
Moment's recess. Y minuto 35 na legislatura ng Guam is back from recess. Senator Paris, on your amendments.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So there were 3 amendments that were sent. I'm only seeing 1 amendment so far, but I can go ahead and start with that one. So it's labeled SFPL 17, page 17. So actually, the correct page number should have been on, page 18. It's section, for everybody's reference, it's in the euthanasia procedures, section 70.10.12. And it is in E, so subsection E. So the purpose of this amendment was to clarify person. So if I can just read the amendment, it's to amend that section. Animal's body may not be disposed of until a licensed veterinarian or person, as authorized by section 121906 of Article 19, Part 2, Chapter 12, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, confirms death. So basically, the addition here was licensed veterinarian. So just to provide more clarity.
On the amendment, anyone wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Paris?
Yes, there are 2 other amendments that are not appearing up in the Dropbox or in the file. So moment's recess for that.
We're in a moment's recess. Y minuto 35 na legislatura ng Guam is back from recess. The amendments are here. Senator Paris, you may proceed.
Sorry, Madam Speaker, I still don't see it in the folder. Okay, thank you.
Y mina 35 na la sesión en Guam, back from recess. Senator Paris, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. So the amendment is entitled SFPL 17, page 17, 2, and it reads 6, euthanasia as properly conducted by a licensed veterinarian or individual authorized by section 70.10.12 of this article and done in accordance with local law and generally accepted industry practice. So the question was raised, whether as far as the procedures that are used at the animal shelter to ensure that they, that they're exempted, and that this is the amendment that addresses that question.
Thank you, Senator Paris, but you also want to add to allow legal
Yes.
to make the technical corrections?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to also allow legal to make technical corrections.
On the amendment, anyone wishing to speak? Are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none. Motion carries. Senator Paris, you have one more amendment.
Okay, the third amendment is on page 18, line 7, I believe. And it's basically to make a change from the Board of Veterinary Medicine to the Guam Board of Allied Health Examiners. So that is the board that approves those that are authorized, or authorizes those that are qualified to euthanize animals. So I can read the whole amendment. It's A, unless otherwise authorized by law, sodium pentobarbital and such other agents as may be specifically approved by the Guam Board of Allied Health Examiners shall be the only methods used for euthanasia of an animal. A lethal solution shall be used in the following order of preference.
Thank you, Senator Paris. On the amendment,
And to allow legal to make technical corrections.
thank you. On that amendment, anyone wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Paris on the closing.
Okay. So I want to thank my colleagues for their questions and their amendments to clarify and localize the bill. It's essential that we strengthen our laws to properly protect animals and to reflect the standards of care and compassion of our people. By enshrining into our statutes a holistic approach to protecting animals, holding abusers accountable, and providing for their rehabilitation, we can preserve our island's long-standing values and cultivate a strong and peaceful community. We are all disturbed by the increasing reports of animal cruelty in our island, and this piece of legislation is an important step in addressing violence towards those without a voice. Make no mistake, violence is violence, and one day it may be directed at an animal, another day it could be directed at a child or a domestic partner. And studies show a staggeringly high correlation between animal cruelty and domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse. We must address this violence in order to protect the most vulnerable amongst us and help our community. I thank my colleagues for their time and consideration and welcome their support on this critical bill. Masi.
Thank you, Senator Paris. On the motion to push it to the voting file, please.
I make the motion to move Bill 185-35 COR to the voting file.
And that's the one that's substituted on the floor. On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Colleagues, we are now on Bill 426-35 COR. Senator March Taxino, you are recognized.
Notwithstanding the House rules, I would like to I would like to switch the order of my bills and discuss instead Bill number 268-35 COR. So with
On the
that,
mo-
sorry.
Madam Assistant Majority Leader, I apologize. On the motion to the third reading, if you can read, did you read the title?
Yes, so I would like to place Bill number 268-35 COR onto the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it. It's a bill authored by myself, Tina Rose Munya-Barnes, Jose Pito Terlahi, Clinton E. Rigel, Joe S. San Agustin, Teresa M. Terlahi, Sabina Flores-Perez. An act to add a new subsection 1039 to Chapter 10, Title 1, Guam Code Annotated, relative to recognizing and celebrating I Man Manatsu Siha on the second day in September.
So, colleagues, I'm going to take it on both. I'm going to take it on two motions to switch the order from Bill 268-35 COR and Bill number 426-35 COR. Is there an objection? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. On the motion to place into the third reading to discuss, please.
Restate it?
Yeah, because I took it in two motions.
Okay,
So
so
if you can,
for Bill 268-35 CORR, I would like to place it into the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
on that motion, please proceed.
As we should, we all know who Martin Luther King Jr. is. We all know who Susan B. Anthony is and Harriet Tubman. This is in no small part because they are recognized each and every year by official holidays, as is the case for Martin Luther King Jr., and in days of recognition, as is the case for Susan B. Anthony and Harriet Tubman. It is very possible that as seminal as these individuals were in transforming U.S. history and our daily lives, our civil rights, and our respect for and inclusion of one another as fellow citizens and fellow human beings, that the majority of us would not know who these stalwart historical figures are without these annual days of commemoration. As a result, our lives would be less rich, we would have less understanding of ourselves as a nation and as a society, and their names and their admirable accomplishments would possibly be lost to the vagaries of time instead of inspiring the best in us as we move forward individually and together. Just as it is important for each of us to know of such people and of overcoming such struggles, for more fairness and more respect for one another nationally and globally, it is important for us to understand how members of our community have contributed to that great arc of history. To know how Chamoros and the people of Guam have thrived, excelled, and struggled to overcome challenges of all kinds. To inspire our youth and each other to continue to strive for a better tomorrow based on strong principles and sound causes. We often discuss and wonder about those in society who have lost their way. As we know, on Guam we have high rates of suicide, drug abuse, and crime, including domestic abuse and assault. A day of commemoration like this in and of itself won't solve everything, but it is one more element of validation, inspiration, and pride that are what our agency experts and others say is needed to help combat these kinds of issues along with other measures. Bill 268-35 is an act to recognize and celebrate I Man Manatsu Siha on the second day in September. I Magahaga shall issue a proclamation annually calling upon the peoples of Guahan to observe Ha'anan I Man Manatsu Siha Puti Tautau Tanu. And I commission I Finotsamaro Zan Fananagwan I Historia Zan I Lanatla Tautau Tanu the Commission on Chamorro Language and the Teaching of the History and Culture of the Indigenous People of Guam shall plan and make appropriate arrangements for the observation of this day, including, if needed, to delegate such planning to an appropriate entity. Chamorros and the people of Guam have a lengthy history of standing up for the people of Guam from ancestral times to the present. Most of us have heard of Harau, Kapua, and perhaps a few others. But our history is replete with women and men who deserve to have their accomplishments, their life's work, and their advances that they strove for be recognized. For example, in the 1600s, Felipa Ezizi, at the age of 12, negotiated a pardon with the Spanish governor for her uncle Olenok, a warrior who had fought to retain his traditional way of life and sovereignty. During the Spanish administration in 1874, Luis Narciso Baza, along with priests and others in the community, held Spanish Governor Moscoso accountable for his abuse of the people of Guam and the Marianas by winning a case in the Spanish tribunal, which found Moscoso guilty of numerous charges. As a result, Moscoso had to pay the full amount for that tribunal and was banned from public service for the rest of his life and exiled from the Marianas, the Philippines, and the capital of Spain, Madrid. The Guam Legislature would not be here today in its 35th term without the efforts of people like Francisco B. Leon Guerrero, Baltazar J. Bordallo, my defunto father-in-law Carlos Pangilinan Taitano, Antonio B. Wampat, Laura Thompson, and others, who strongly advocated for local self-government in the mid-1900s. And the list goes on and on of those who have stood up for our community and the people of Guam. It is a list of whom we know far too few. Many of us just recently participated in Black Lives Matter movement and other movements this year. We see that there is still much to advocate for here and elsewhere. Let us remember those who paved the way for us on Guam by commemorating them. Let us pave the way to inspire others to continue standing up for a better tomorrow for all of us. September 2nd was chosen for this because there are two reasons. One, it is an event that happened just recently where we had our Whanogi March for Self-Determination, and we had thousands of people come out and stand for righting injustices. The other is it occurs at the beginning of the school year, giving just enough time to give students this ability to be learning about somebody important in our community, be developing that sense of pride at the beginning of the school year and setting off a very good tone and positive atmosphere for the rest of the school year. So I ask for the supportive consideration of my colleagues, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Senator Taitano. On the main motion, anyone wishing to speak? Senator Teresa Lai, you recognize, and then Senator Will.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I stand in support of this legislation, and I think we've come to a time in Guam where we can very much benefit, as the sponsor said, from efforts culminating together, combined efforts. We've got historians now, we've got Chamorro historians even. We have a university with Chamorro studies that is thriving. We have throughout the schools Chamorro language programs, we have a Chamorro immersion program, and we have, of course, our commission that has also, taken it upon itself to pull all these resources together. And as the sponsor said, studies have shown that, identity things that help persons to learn their identity, to be proud of their identity, are helping to combat suicide rates in communities where there are very high suicide rates. And so I think that this bill it's in good timing given suicide rates on Guam, and it's just another tool that we can use to combat that and to help build our community up. And it's also, I think, comes at a time when we actually have the resources where we can celebrate in a very good way based on the studies and the work that has gone before us. So I want to thank the sponsor for this bill.
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. Senator Will Castro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the initiative. I thank the prime author for working to establish a formal day where this community could honor, or at the very least, draw recognition to those who have made a difference in our lives in this community. Certainly as a social studies teacher here on Guam, I can appreciate what this means for our people. I can see how this lifts up our social consciousness about those things around us and how those things came to life by the movers and shakers of the not-so-distant past. As you stated very aptly, Senator, the Chamoru people are a proud, learned, and resilient people. We're a people who learned through the oral transfer of knowledge and memory how to master celestial navigation in the lands and the oceans that we immersed ourselves in. And I understand it, Senator, and I guess I spoke up today because I understand even further your intent after the discussion last night that this doesn't restrict such recognitions to men and women of Chamorro descent. I can appreciate that. Neither does her bill attempt to recognize strictly the ancients, if you will. In my opinion, the bill is broadly written so that it can provide a forum for such contemporary warriors to be recognized as well. As Dr. Marsh Taitano iterated in her opening remarks, she alluded to men and women who've left an indelible mark in the annals of time. I mean, we see Chamorro rights activists' names that come up all the time. I had the privilege of serving him. That was Difunten Onget Santos and observing the late Magalahi Ed Beneventi and listening to Dr. Bernardita Komatsu Dunkap. But this bill also allows us, Senator, to script into lesson plans or to have a ceremony or whatever it is that you find to be appropriate in your class or in your community that also acknowledges the titans of industry and commerce in the region. I think we're going to find that this piece of legislation also opens the door to recognize these pioneers of sports and competitive play whose names don't ring well here. I mean, they're not as resounding unless you're in that industry, right? Like Melker Manabusen and those folks who opened up the MMA industry and who educated me that we have the most champions per capita than any other place in the world in that space. And so for that, Senator, I rise in support of this measure. What people may dismiss as yet another holiday, I want to encourage you to look at it as yet another opportunity to formally draw recognition and commemoration, if you have to those who've made a difference in this community. I thank you so much, Senator Taitano, for championing and being a consistent purveyor of our Chamorro rights, language, and heritage. Sidus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Castro. Senator Regine Pisco-Lee on the main motion.
Sidus Masi, Madam Speaker, and Hafide colleagues. I noticed, Madam Speaker, that both BBMR and our Legislative Office of Finance and Budget have determined that this bill is administrative in nature and would have no fiscal impact. And so if the author would yield to a question.
Please state your question.
Sidus Masi, I just wanted to see if she could confirm that creating this new holiday as prescribed in this bill would not add another paid holiday for GovGuam workers.
Senator Taitano, would you like to yield to that question?
Hungin. And I'm glad that this is being addressed because it is an important consideration, and I want to emphasize it. It is a day of commemoration, and it is not a paid holiday. So there will be no additional cost, and actually, the hope is that quite often it will happen on a weekday where children in school can commemorate it in school alongside teachers and others. So just for clarity, it is not a paid holiday, it's just a day of commemoration.
Thank you, Senator Taitsino. Senator Lee, you are recognized still on the motion.
Suzus Masi, Madam Speaker, and I thank the author of this bill for the clarification, as it's one of the main reasons that I remain steadfast in my support for this bill. I certainly applaud the author for continuing to find ways for our people to learn our history, to share the wisdom of our mañana, and to continue what we have learned, and have that be perpetuated for future generations. Suzus Masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Taitsino, you may close.
Sainama'asi Mazgahalu. And I would like to add on Senator Will Castro as a co-sponsor as well, and just to double check everybody else who is there, and others who have spoken up, such as Senator Regine Bisco-Lee. If she would like to be a co-sponsor, I'd like to add her on as well.
On that motion, without any objections, seeing or hearing none, motion carries. On the closing, Senator Taitsino, Assistant Majority Leader.
Sainama'asi Mazgahalu. So we can easily see the way that Chamorro Day grew into Chamorro Month, and some are now even calling it Sakan i Chamorro, where every day is a celebration of Chamorro culture and lifeways and traditions, and how it has really transformed so much of our daily life. For those of us that are old enough like myself, we know what life was like before we started these public celebrations. And again, oftentimes they're in school and they make a lasting impression. This bill is not just a matter of reflecting on the past, but also to provide inspiration for our youth and our future generations. If we show them what has been achieved, we will motivate them to reach even higher. Suzus Masi.
On the motion to the third reading voting file,
Yes, I motion to place the Bill 268-35 COR into the third reading voting file.
on that motion, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Thank you, Senator Taitsino, Assistant Majority Leader. We will now recognize Senator Amanda Shelton, Legislative Secretary, on Bill number 301-35 COR. Senator Shelton, you are recognized. For the record, Legislative Secretary, could you please read what committee it's coming from, the author, and then the title, please?
Dispensa, Madam Speaker. It's my understanding that they're working on some AV issues. Apparently, Senator Shelton's microphone is not being picked up in the hall. So if we could just have a moment's recess to figure out what's going on the AV side. I just would hate for what Senator Shelton is expressing to the body to not be heard by the public.
Thank you. We are in a
Thank you.
moment's recess. Y minuto 85 na legislatura in Guam is back from recess. Thank you, audio, for taking care of that. Senator Shelton, Legislative Secretary, you may proceed.
Bill 301 is an act to help our only civilian public hospital on the island. And I know that we cannot overstate the need for help at GMH anymore. We've heard over the last several months dealing with the pandemic how hard the people at the Guam Memorial Hospital have been working for our community. And they've been doing it with very limited resources. And this is a bill to help over a 5-year period of time to give them $1 million worth of hospital equipment every year. It's a way for us to almost guarantee to the hospital an additional $1 million worth of equipment that they deem necessary to carry out the services needed by the people of Guam. And so this act will authorize $1 million of tax credits to businesses, not to exceed $1 million per year over 5 years. And I'd like to thank the committee chair for her help to put out an amended version of the bill to clear up some of the concerns from the original bill. I invite my colleagues for discussion today to help strengthen this legislation. Sijis Masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Shelton, Legislative Secretary. Assistant Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Saina Ma'asi Maska Halu. In looking at this bill, things had kind of developed rather quickly, and it's coming to my attention that we have 2 bills today that make some pretty sizable, basically appropriations, even though they are tax credits. It's monies that are going to be affecting our general fund. And so I would say maybe for both of them and maybe together to have a committee of the whole.
Is there a motion? There is a motion on the floor. It's not debatable. Are there any objections? There's an objection. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Senator Taitanu, you still have the floor on the main motion.
Well, I'm inclined to want to support something as laudable as these 2 bills are, but especially at this time when we're hearing that everything is underperforming, to make decisions that are going to impact our annual budget, our coffers, by $1.5 million, I really struggle with being able to move forward with these if we don't have no understanding of how that's going to be impacting the budget that we've already passed and understanding how that's performing. So I would hate to not be able to support these because I don't have adequate information. I find that really unfortunate. If others are prepared to go ahead and make $1.5 million worth of impact to our general funds and the very same hospital and our education and our Department of Public Health and Social Services that are relying on that general fund's money to be coming through, maybe they feel that they can do that, but I really don't see how we can do this without without calling committee of the whole, and we did so for much more less. For the $400,000 for the national basketball team, we had a committee of the whole. And we took this deliberation seriously because it has an impact. Part of what I'd like to understand is how many times have we already made such commitments? We have $400,000 to the National Basketball Association. We have other such tax credits that are already in place. So it seems to me that we should at least know how much in totality we're talking about that's already being diverted, if you will, from going into the general fund. I just don't see that it's a fiscally prudent decision to go forward without the committee of the whole. And so if it's possible at all, I
Senator,
I
on the merits,
object to not being able to go to the committee of the whole.
Senator, on the merits of the bill, you can raise your objection based on that, but please, on the merits of the bill.
Point of inquiry, Madam Speaker, point of order. Is this a bill deemed by the Speaker to be a appropriation bill? Because our rules,
No, I
if I'm
don't.
pretty, says that we automatically go into committee of the whole for appropriation bills.
At this time, Senator Therese, I will take a moment's recess just to confer to make sure to support my standing on the measure. I do not think that this is an appropriations bill. We will take a moment's recess. Imina 85 na las Guahan is back from recess. I've conferred with legal. This measure is not an appropriations measure. The committee report and the public hearing was under the oversight chair of the Committee on Health. If anybody wishes to overrule my decision, you may do so at this time. If not, we will proceed. On the main motion, anyone wishing to speak? Senator Castro, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the measure. I just want to share some experiences. For many of my colleagues in the hall, we can just draw back to the last few years. We've seen where a percentage of the proposed tax increase was supposed to be dedicated to the hospital, and that didn't go through. I think even prior to that, we saw that a bond that was floated, a percentage of that bond was also assigned and dedicated to pay off some of those liabilities of the hospital. Every year, every election cycle, we constantly look for opportunities to address the perennial problems facing GMH. I think this is one way to do it. I'm certainly glad that my colleague and others in the hall here are receptive to that. Certainly wasn't the case in the last few years. I just want to note also, based on having some exposure to these discussions, that the technology side of the house is also in the 20s of millions of dollars if you were to look at it comprehensively through the different systems of care, whether it was public health, that was tied into mental health, that was tied into GMH. And so this $1 million tax credit up to $5 million max, if that's a parameter, I think is one way to look at it without necessarily having to take out another loan or another loan in the form of a bond. Nor does it require that we increase taxes and dedicate a portion of that again, or at least try to do that. So I rise in support of this initiative and any other initiative that dedicates monies to the Guam Memorial Hospital. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Castro. On the main motion, are there anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else? Senator Lee, you are recognized on the main motion.
Suzos Masi, Madam Speaker, and I too rise in support of the intent of this measure. I did just have a point of inquiry, a question for the author, if I may, Madam Speaker.
Please state your question.
I just wanted to get additional clarification with regard to the fiscal note or any information from DBMR or OFB with regard to this measure and the potential fiscal impact. And I believe that the sponsor, I just wanted to give her an opportunity to express that and share that information with the body. Suzos Masi.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Legislative Secretary, would you like to yield to the question?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question. Reading directly from the fiscal note, the bill will authorize the business privilege tax, BPT tax credits for funds that are not already pledged for any purpose per Guam law. The amount of available tax credits shall not exceed $5 million of credits against the unpledged business taxes, with a limitation of $1 million in tax credits issued per year up to 5 years. The bill would allow the Guam Legislature to extend the eligible period and term should there be lapses of unclaimed tax credits. The legislation would also authorize GIDA to charge a processing fee to defer the cost of administering the program. GIDA would be authorized to collect up to 1.5% of the amount of tax credits. And just to note, in the amended version of this bill, it was actually lessened to 1% to follow the recommendation here in the fiscal note. It should be noted per GIDA, the cost to administer the tax credit program is between $8,000 to $10,000 annually. Absent any additional information from GIDA, the Bureau is unable to determine the true impact the government of Guam may face. However, the Bureau notes it is concerned that the use of tax credits will impact the government's ability to manage the finances of the government of Guam. So yes, this is the fiscal note from the Bureau. However, we know that it is capped at $1 million, this bill per year, $1 million per year for a 5-year period. So we know the impact will not be greater than $1 million per year. And for a very worthy cause to go to the Guam Memorial Hospital to pledge these dollars to the equipment needed to serve the quality of health of our people.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Point of information.
Please state your point of information, Assistant Majority Leader.
Yes, in reading the fiscal note, I just think it's fair to read the entire fiscal note. So the statement is, for the last 2 sentences, absent any additional information From GITA, the Bureau is unable to determine the true impact to the government of Guam may face. However, the Bureau notes it is concerned that the use of tax credits will impact the government's ability to manage the finances of the government of Guam, as it will reduce the expected revenues due to the government. The filing of tax credits by the taxpayer will take priority over appropriations made in the annual budget process, which may impact government programs. So, as we go forward, I think it's important to
Senator, duly
hear the
noted
whole
on the point of information
statement.
on that. Senator Lee, you still have the floor.
Sudos Masi, Madam Speaker, and I thank the author of this measure for clarifying and for giving us additional information based on the fiscal note. Madam Speaker, we've all seen and heard it time and time again, day in and day out, of all of the financial challenges faced by the Guam Memorial Hospital, by our public health service, and by all of our frontliners, especially during this, in the midst of this pandemic. And so, Madam Speaker, any opportunity that we can find, any outside of the box thinking at this time to really try to bring additional resources to our island's only public hospital, we should all be in favor of that, Madam Speaker. I urge my colleagues to consider this bill and to support it. I think that it's a great investment for our people, and to make sure that, God forbid any of us winds up in the hospital in the next few weeks or months, at least we'll know that we have new equipment that can be donated because of programs like this. And, I just encourage the incoming 36th Guam Legislature to continue to look for ways that we can bring in other sectors of our community to help out Guam's only public hospital, as we know that they are in dire need, Madam Speaker. So again, I thank the author of this bill, I thank all the co-sponsors, and I urge my colleagues to support it. Sudos Masi.
We're to Senator Regine Visco-Lee on the main motion. No one else. Senator Therese on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The points that have been raised are very valid, I believe. I think tax credits to fund necessities of a hospital is really a last resort. And unfortunately, it seems we have come to that. I really don't support the use of tax credits to fund the government, because we can't control them as well as we can control outright spending, prioritize spending, and we can control appropriations to go exactly where we want that to go. So the bill, I support this bill because it's tailored so that they can't buy any equipment. They can only buy the equipment that the hospital board deems is necessary, priority. So I'm hoping that that does not get abused, and that's exactly what happens, is that, we get priority value, or, priority equipment. We get the value for our tax credits that we are giving in return. And I hope, with Gita's help, that the hospital will obtain value on these, this equipment as well. And, of course, the best way is if the hospital needs money, that we appropriate that money. And we go through competitive procurement. So the bill also includes competitive procurement. So I also like that part about the bill. And I also want to acknowledge that without this bill, the Guam Memorial Hospital Volunteers Association has actually excelled at fundraising and seeking donations, specifically for the purpose of getting very much needed equipment for the Guam Memorial Hospital. And so I want to thank them for all their years of efforts, and that I hope they will continue to help the hospital, with this new tool as well. But they really have excelled. They are, an example, I believe, of doing, a lot of times these nonprofits are doing what the government should be doing, in the absence of the government doing what it should be doing. So I just want to thank them for all their years of great leadership in order to get that done. They, and so, generally, I don't think tax credits, as the BBMR has said, we're taking tax credits now. That means we're going to reduce the gross receipts tax revenues of the government of Guam after we've already appropriated, a certain level of gross receipts tax revenue. So there are implications to that. There may have to be cuts made on the spending side in order to make up for those cuts on the revenue side that come with the tax credit. But, again, the reason I support this bill in particular is because when we tried to make an appropriation outright to the Guam Memorial Hospital for capital improvement projects and necessary equipment such as its electronic health record system, that money never got to the hospital. So, this is kind of another way to ensure that they're going to get what they need. This time, it's less direct, but, it should work. But if it has implications on the government spending side, then I hate to say it, but so be it. Because when we appropriated $10 million from excess revenues to go to the hospital, it never went there. So that $10 million in excess revenues, the government was able to spend and did not prioritize the hospital. So, we might have to live with this in FY21. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Therese. On the main motion, if not, Senator Shelton, Legislative Secretary, you may close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank our colleagues for their support of the bill. And to mention that, yes, the fiscal note of this bill did mention that filing of tax credits by the taxpayer will take priority over appropriations made in the annual budget process. And although this bill may seem like a risk to the rest of the general fund and what we might be appropriating in future budget cycles, what we're doing here today is showing the people of Guam that we in fact prioritize their health and prioritize funding medical equipment at the Guam Memorial Hospital. I'm also thankful to the previous speaker for recognizing the Guam Memorial Hospital's Volunteer Association, which has been an amazing partner to our only public hospital. And why I feel this bill is so important during this time is because many of the signature fundraising events that bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars every year for the Volunteers Association to buy medical equipment for the hospital have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. The Volunteers Association has not been able to host the Thanksgiving raffle, the charity ball, which are the biggest fundraising events. Though we have adapted and innovated to continue fundraising and collecting money. Of course, our fundraising efforts have not been as successful with these conditions that we're all faced with today. And so I think that this is another way for us to help the Volunteers Association out with their mission, and as the government, show and pledge our support to our people and to the health of our island. And I thank all of our colleagues again for their support of this bill. Situas Masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Legislative Secretary. Legislative Secretary, on the motion to place on the voting file.
Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill number 301-35 as amended into the voting file.
On that motion, colleagues, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Colleagues, we are now on Bill 416-35 LS. Legislative Secretary, you are acknowledged. You're recognized. This is your
Thank you
bill.
very much, Madam Speaker. And I move to place Bill number 416-35 as amended into the third reading file.
If you can read the title, the committee, and the authors, please.
Bill number 416-35 COR as amended by the Committee on Higher Education and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens, introduced by Amanda L. Shelton, Joe S. San Augustin, and Tina Rose Munya Barnes, an act to add a new Article 13 to Chapter 2 of Division 1, Title 10, Guam Code Annotated, relative to the establishment of the Senior Citizen Housing Task Force Act of 2020.
On the motion, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is a bill to establish a task force made up of experts on senior citizens, stakeholders, experts on housing, to help us establish a plan moving forward to provide for senior citizens housing. As we're all aware, we do have a very limited senior housing available on island. What probably comes to mind to most is the Guma Tranquilidad Center down in Tumon. That is aging. The facility is aging. The waiting list is quite long. And there are other needs of our senior citizens population, our aging population, that must be met. And so this is an act for us to help plan for the future, to best take care of our Manamku and to help them to live as independently as possible with as much dignity as possible. It's been our tradition usually to care for seniors of our family within our homes. It's really quite a blessing to be able to care for an aging parent or a grandparent. But sometimes now with changes in society, the need to work more or family dynamics, that's not always possible. We don't want to see any of our Manamku be left behind or abandoned because we no longer have the family unit to take care of each other. We want to ensure that as a community, we are taking care of our elders. So, Madam Speaker, I welcome the discussion today. If there's any amendments from our colleagues to strengthen this bill, and I ask for all of our colleagues' support today. Situas Masi.
Thank you, Legislative Secretary. On the main motion, anyone wishing to speak? If Senator Teresa Lahi, and then Assistant Majority Leader.
Thank you. I wanted to just get some additional information from the sponsor sheet with you. The first question I have is, I agree with the housing task force, of course, and that specifically for elderly. But on page 3 of the bill, section 22004, it talks about the task force shall be established by the Commission on Higher Education and the Advancement of Women, Youth, and Senior Citizens, and for administrative purposes. So I wanted to know, is this a commission that exists in statute, or is, I can't find that one.
Thank you, Senator. Legislative Secretary, would you like to yield?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the intent of the bill is for the commission, the task force, to be established under the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens. So currently, that is the title of the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens.
Senator Talai, does that help?
Okay. All right. I noted that in another part of the bill, it does talk about the Committee on Higher Education and the Advancement. If I could just ask then that legal make changes where necessary in regard to the words committee or commission, just so that it's clear.
Thank you. On that motion to allow legal to make the necessary corrections as stated by the proffer of the amendment on committee versus commission, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Talai, you still have the floor.
Thank you. And if the author would yield again to another question, it's so on page 3 again, it talks about, well, throughout the bill, it talks about the chairperson of this task force, but I'm not sure who the chairperson of the task force will be. And I'm wondering if that's contained in this bill.
Thank you. Legislative Secretary, would you like to yield?
It is not clearly defined in the bill how the chairperson of the task force will be chosen, but I would leave that up to the task force.
All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the sponsor for yielding. Otherwise, I just wanted to note that when I read the committee report and the testimony that was presented, Mr. Carlos Camacho came and gave us several different suggestions, I guess, for further work in this regard. But I do agree that a task force, especially one that's going to be, led by the legislature and that's going to help the legislature to focus on its next steps as far as meeting the need for senior housing, that we do that. I know that I have had several meetings this term regarding, changes that might be necessary in the law to allow different types of licensing for different types of elderly care facilities, depending on the level of care that is necessary. And so I want to thank those that have brought that to my attention, and that, I'm looking forward to working together with this task force to ensure that, we do expand our availability to care for our elderly and places where they can thrive and live safe and secure.
You're welcome, Senator Talai. Assistant Majority Leader, you are recognized.
I rise in support of this bill, and I appreciated being able to attend the public hearing as well. And with efforts like this, I think it's so important that we have long-term planning. Our society is incredibly quickly changing. It's almost unrecognizable from just a few generations ago. We have demographic changes and modern lifestyle changes. We've changed from living in family compounds to having families scattered all over the island to all over the entire globe. Our agencies and nonprofits that we have offer important services, and they are there to care for our Manumco, but it does so happen that certain mandates are in place, and it means that oftentimes gaps can be developing. And so it's really important, I think, that we have a task force that sits down and looks at where any of these gaps may be, because it's to look at all of the government agencies and on the island, I believe, to understand what these services are and what the needs are. And to come up with an updated profile of our Manumco, I think, is very important. And as was mentioned previously, to understand their housing needs and to get all of these efforts of the government to be coordinated together. All of that makes very good sense. We do know that the housing needs for many in our community, for the very vulnerable, for the homeless, and for the Manumco, perhaps also, those needs are really rising, and we need to figure out some solutions. So, again, I rise in support of this bill. I think it will do very good things for a very important part of our community.
Thank you. On the main motion, there are no one else wishing to speak. Senator, or Legislative Secretary, you may close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank our colleagues for their support of the bill, for their support of our community, and especially our Manumku. And that's all. I move to place this bill, Bill number 416-35, as amended, into the voting file.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Colleagues, we are now on Bill 405-35, COR. Senator Regine Biscoli, I will recognize you at this time.
Sudosmasi, Madam Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill number 405-35 COR onto the third reading file and be provided the opportunity to discuss it. Madam Speaker, Bill 405-35 COR was introduced by myself, Regine Biscoli, and it's an act relative to establishing a task force to explore the feasibility of creating a groundwater conservation area on select Government of Guam properties which overlay the portion of the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer, or NGLA, wherein no production wells shall be installed and no development shall occur. Madam Speaker.
On that motion, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 405-35 is part of an agenda, a legislative vision that is focused on securing our environment and our economy, both today and for generations to come. Madam Speaker and colleagues, the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer, or NGLA, is a precious resource that took millions of years to form and continues to provide our island's drinking water supply, sustaining lives and livelihoods for centuries. I'd like to thank our partners in drafting this and other measures in our NGLA bill suite, to include the team at the Water and Environmental Research Institute of the Western Pacific, or WERI, led by Dr. John Jensen and Dr. Nathan Habana, a team at Guam Water Works Authority, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and Director Jack Haddock at the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, and all the members of the NGLA Technical Advisory Group. Madam Speaker, Bill 405 takes the first step in the creation of groundwater conservation areas on Guam properties over the NGLA by establishing a task force composed of experts and officials. The task force would be charged to study which areas need the most protection, the best regulation practices over the NGLA, and land use restrictions. Madam Speaker, WERI has raised a concern that this bill unfairly describes the relationship between water wells and the Northern Aquifer. Dr. Jensen from WERI testified at the bill's public hearing that the establishment of groundwater conservation areas would provide us an opportunity to optimize production out of the aquifer. And so to this end, Madam Speaker, I would like to proffer an amendment at this time to remove references to the prohibition of drinking water wells from the bill in order to allow the task force to determine what, if any, new regulations over water wells the local government should enact. And Madam Speaker, this is on line 11 through 13 on page 1, to amend the title and section 1 of the bill to read, where it states no production well shall be installed. That will be replaced with new language that says, a groundwater conservation area on select government of Guam properties which overlay a portion of the Northern Guam Lands Aquifer, NGLA, wherein regulation and management of development shall occur. And also, Madam Speaker, to allow Legislative Council to make technical corrections.
On the amendment, are there anyone wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Lee, you still have the floor.
Sizos Maasi, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much, colleagues. We should preserve one main concept of the groundwater conservation areas, and these properties can provide the very places to install wells that are of optimal quality and sustainable production. So I thank my colleagues for their consideration of that amendment. Madam Speaker, in a public hearing on a companion bill, stakeholders from the real estate community expressed their desires for further studies on the NGLA to produce more data on sources of contamination and possible causes of aquifer pollution. This measure can be the direct response to calls from many in our community, including both landowners and conservationists, to update our strategic plans for this massive portion of our island, and to provide a framework for all involved in land development to follow in the future. And so at this time, Madam Speaker, I'd like to proffer another amendment so our government can continue to research and develop the best policy concerning the use of wastewater systems over the aquifer, including the adoption of more effective technology. And Madam Speaker, that would be on line 20, page 3, to amend Section 2D of the bill to read, the task force shall produce a feasibility study in the form of a written report that includes, at a minimum, an assessment of the following. And then it lines out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and number 6 and 7 are the changes. And so that would be what additional regulations, if any, should be placed on the construction of Type 2 facilities as defined in 10 GCA subsection 48104A, and advanced nitrogen-reducing residential on-site disposal systems on the above identified zones, areas, or portions of the NGLA, and why. And also to allow Legislative Council to make technical corrections. I submit, Madam Speaker, that it is our intent that the task force should have the flexibility to explore a wide range of possible models for regulation of development over the aquifer, and the feasibility study provides such flexibility for the task force to assess other aspects and other models. And so I thank my colleagues for their consideration. Again, this amendment was made based on feedback that we received from other public hearings, and so we just want to, again, give the task force additional flexibility. Sidus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Lee. On the amendment, Senator Therese, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Unfortunately, I raise an objection to this amendment, and as the proffer stated, this has been discussed in other public hearings on other bills, and actually the regulation of septic tanks, which is what Type 2 and Type 4 they're referring to, or these are types of septic tanks or waste disposal for residential housing. This is a very controversial topic at the moment, and actually EPA, Guam EPA, has exclusive authority to determine which ones they are going to give permits to review new technologies and to come up with which ones can be approved. And so I would not want to put that into this bill and kind of lessen Guam EPA's authority in this regard, or its current authority to regulate septic tanks. And I think that was why those other bills are so controversial, because we're talking about the ability of people to build residential housing areas. And we are actually in those other hearings talking about the ability of people on parental subdivisions to build residences in areas where there is no sewer So I think that the purposes of this task force can be accomplished without getting into the nitty-gritty of the rules and regs of septic tanks, which is within the purview of the Guam EPA, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? Assistant Majority Leader, did you have your hand up? On the amendment, there has been an objection. All those who support the amendment as
I apologize, Madam Speaker.
I do apologize. I'll allow you to close.
Sudos Masi, and I want to thank the previous speaker for raising concerns. I again just want to read the amendment for my colleagues, and this is establishing a task force that shall produce a feasibility study. So what our goal here is to give this task force some ground rules and some items to be able to provide a written report to include assessments back to the legislature. And so we're not taking anything away from Guam EPA with this language, Madam Speaker. We're just asking the task force to also consider what additional regulations they might suggest that the legislature consider should be placed on the construction of Type 2 facilities, if any. So we're just asking them to look at it. We're just asking for additional information, for additional data, and we're asking this group of subject matter experts in this task force to tell us what they think should be included. It's not changing anything in law. It's just asking them, as was raised in public hearing after public hearing, that there's not enough information about this bill. And so we're always talking about giving the public an opportunity to be better educated on these issues and to bring them along. And so, Madam Speaker, that's exactly what this amendment does, is it allows for additional information to be discussed by the task force. And if they decide that they want or they would suggest additional regulations be in place, there's an entire other rules and regulations process or public hearing process or legislative process on a new bill that would have to commence for any changes or any authorization or anything to change with what EPA is currently in charge of. So this does not take anything away from EPA. So I just want to make that very clear to my colleagues. I urge them to support this amendment. This was language that was given to us or requested from WERI. So they're asking to have the flexibility to look at Type 2 facilities and be able to better inform the public with additional data. And that's all that this amendment does. It does not take away any authority from the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. So I just really want to make that point very clear. And I urge my colleagues to please support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. There has been an objection to this amendment proffered by the good senator from Sinahanya. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. 6. Hold on. Raise your hands, please. 7. Motion fails. Senator Lee, you still have the floor.
Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker. For the record, Madam Speaker, this measure does not result in any specific prohibitions or restrictions or reforms to our current law. And I'll repeat, this measure does not result in any specific prohibitions, restrictions, or reforms to our current law. It merely empowers experts and stakeholders to make these recommendations, to submit them back to this body for further discussion and action. But it's my hope that the result of Bill 405-35 will be that Guam can establish new public parks, green spaces, conservation areas, and research zones that will not only preserve our aquifer for centuries ahead, but also open new and exciting funding for investment opportunities and many other opportunities for our people in the near future. Sujos Masi.
Thank you. On the main motion, Senator Taitano, you are recognized.
Sainamasi Maskahalu. And I'd like to ask a question largely to jog my memory and to provide some clarification from one of the associated public hearings
State
of
your
the
question.
author. So Dr. Jensen, as I remember, and I'm hoping I'm remembering correctly, so please correct me as needed. But I believe I remember him saying that there needed to be a study of the aquifer to update the understanding of it, that the older study had been done in kind of the simplified way, and he was promoting a more sophisticated type of study to have a more sophisticated understanding of the aquifer. So I'm trying to remember if he said that that study is indeed scheduled to be happening. And so if the author of the bill could clarify or remind me of some of those details about this potential future study of the aquifer to provide more sophisticated understanding of it.
Senator Lee, would you like to yield?
I apologize, Madam Speaker. I didn't hear the first part of the question, so I'm unsure of the individual that the prior speaker was referring to. If I could get some clarity on that, please.
Yes, I believe it was Dr. Jensen. And so I believe it also was in the one that I heard was another hearing, but there were several that had to do with the aquifer. And so he was saying that the study that we have now creates this sort of blanket understanding that everything basically was considered one type of need of protection. And so he was talking about having a study that would provide us much more sophisticated understanding of where the most vulnerable areas are, where the most robust areas are. And so hopefully the author of the bill remembers that discussion and can let me know if that study is indeed scheduled to occur.
Senator Lee, would you like to yield?
Sudas Masi, Madam Speaker. Yes, and I thank the retiring speaker for her question. There were over 6 public hearings on bills related to the aquifer most recently, and Dr. Jensen and Dr. Nathan Habana, we had the privilege of having them both on to testify for many of them, and they did share with us a number of studies that WERI has done to this date. They shared with us a map of highly concentrated nitrate contamination areas over the northern Guam Lands aquifer, which certainly led me and many others to become concerned about this and to want to be able to implement additional protections in this area. But I do understand that there are a number of students at the University of Guam under the umbrella of WERI that are currently doing additional studies in this regard. I believe master's students and others. So it's going to take some additional time to get much more data. I think the initial phase will begin soon, but WERI continues to research the aquifer, and one clear need is to update the boundaries and the characterization of all of the properties in the northern Guam Lands aquifer or the groundwater protection zone. And that's really what my hope is with this bill, is that we can, get all these subject matter experts together, get them focused on this. We all understand that water is life, and should this very precious resource become contaminated or further contaminated, it would be disastrous, not just for the people living in the north, but the aquifer represents over 80% of our water supply, so it would be extremely damaging to the health and wellness of our people, but also just incredibly damaging to our economy. You just can't have a functioning industry or economy without fresh, clean water. And so again, I think the proffer of the question, I hope that I answered it. So yes, there have been many studies on the aquifer, especially with regard to this area, but WERI continues to do specific studies and research with regard to the boundaries and the characterizations of this property. So while that might not be specifically addressed in this bill, data gathered through the task force that we're establishing in Bill 405 can really help to inform much more detailed and comprehensive research on this topic. Thank you.
Assistant Majority Leader.
Sainama Asi Maska Halu, and to the author of the bill for yielding to the question. I believe the study that she mentioned about updating the boundaries and the characterizations of the aquifer is the same one that I'm referring to. And so I will also continue to do my own research into this, because I think it will be very important to understand where that study's at and what they hope to gain from it and all of the implications to policy going forward. I do agree with the retiring speaker that protecting our aquifer is incredibly important. As I understand it, there is really no coming back from it if we damage it too much. But I do think understanding where we are at with that study will provide a lot of really useful information. So I will continue to reach out for that. Seduas Masi.
Thank you, Assistant Majority Leader. Senator Paris on the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a point of information for the proffer of the question. Yeah, so in my talks with WERI, that they were going to modernize or update the Guam Groundwater Protection Zone. And so they were looking to task that for an incoming scholar. So whether they've engaged in those studies yet, I need to verify that, but that's something that was on their to-do list. And that would definitely is an important piece of information. If there are certain areas that they want to conserve, that's something that they would have to. I think that's just really the preliminary information that's needed. In addition to, I think that it's also important to kind of broaden the scope. So in the committee report, I did provide some recommendations, and one of them I'm proffering an amendment regarding expanding the members of the task force to include SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Officer. The idea behind that is, it's important to look holistically at our land and not just the natural resources segmented from the cultural resources. And I think it's important to look at our land as historic districts. So it's not just natural resources, but also, how it was utilized. And so I do have an amendment. I believe it's being sent or has been sent.
Is that the one to add the State Historic Preservation Officer, the SHPO?
Yes, that's correct. And just to kind of solidify that whole idea of a comprehensive look at our lands as not just natural resources, but together with the cultural resource.
Thank you, Senator Paris. On the amendment to add on item 10, the State Historic Preservation Officer, are there any objections? Anyone wishing to speak? Senator Lee, you are recognized on the amendment.
Seduas Masi, Madam Speaker, I don't object to this amendment, but I did just want to inform the body that it's my understanding that there is a forthcoming amendment that would also add an additional member or representative onto the task force. My initial concern was kind of the balancing and making sure that we had the appropriate number of folks on this task force. So that's not an issue because of a forthcoming amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Paris, you have a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I was thinking of proffering of an amendment to kind of broaden the scope of the task force to look at all threats to our aquifer, and perhaps not just on government lands, but because our aquifer is pretty widespread, right? It's in the northern Guam, part of Guam. And, whether it's on government land or private land or military lands, I mean, they all can have impacts. And in fact, that was brought up in the public hearing, looking at what are the other impacts to the aquifer. So, that's my hope, that we're not just looking at it from just the government lands, because it all can be connected. And the thing about PFAS too, right, the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, their migration patterns are, basically they can move far distances. And I think it would be more impactful to have a task force that looks at all the threats that would cause, potential health effects to our drinking water. So that's something that I would like to perhaps suggest. I don't have an amendment at this time, but I can maybe suspend that, if I can hold off on that amendment, or a recess perhaps. Yeah. Or if we can entertain Senator Lee's amendment first.
It was noted, I'm just going to take a moment's recess. Say that again. Yung minute 35 na legislature in Guahan is back from recess, Senator Paris.
This is
On
Masi,
amendment.
Madam Speaker, for that recess, and so I would like to proffer the amendment. It's on page 3, line 22, and it reads 7, to gather information on all threats to the aquifer and to develop a comprehensive land use policies that address threats and to promote long-term environmental, economic, social sustainability. So again, the idea here is to expand the scope of the task force to look at all threats to the aquifer, to ensure that our drinking water is safe, and also keep in mind the environmental, economic, and social sustainability as well.
Thank you. On the amendment, are there any objections? Senator Leah? Senator Lee, you are recognized.
Sudos Masi, Madam Speaker. Oh, are we back in?
No, I didn't recess. You're
Oh,
still
thank you.
back.
Sudos Masi. Madam Speaker, I'm concerned about this amendment because I feel that this measure only provides a 6-month time frame to complete the study that the task force is responsible for. And the amendment before us says that this new addition is to be comprehensive and long-term. And so I just don't think it's feasible to add this to the measure. And I completely understand the need, but sometimes I'm just concerned that sometimes we spread ourselves too thin and we're not able to accomplish the goal if we kind of water it down with all of the things that we would like to see in the future. I mean, this particular section could be an entirely new and different and separate task force that would take, experts another 6 months to really review and get to the bottom of. And I would be in support of that. But in terms of this measure, I'd have to rise in opposition to this amendment. I just don't feel like it's enough time for what the focus of this measure is attempting to accomplish. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Assistant Majority Leader, you recognize.
Sudos Masi, and I appreciate both the efforts here on the larger, broader view of the proffer of the amendment and then the concerns of the retiring speaker. And so I would move to amend the amendment to have it say to gather information and then to insert in as is feasible. So the way that I envision it is we know what the main focus of the group is, and then as is feasible, to me, as a researcher, I would see that as something as making sure to try to list and maybe provide some description, but maybe to then not have to be committed, as the previous speaker was saying, to this very comprehensive sort of outlaying of it. So I think that might be something that could keep the intent of having a bigger view, but not overly burdening the group to feel like it must be a whole nother study. So yeah, I would like to insert to gather information, comma, as is feasible, comma, on all threats to the aquifer if the body would consider that as a possibility.
On that amendment to the Paris Amendment, comma, after information as is feasible, comma. Anyone wishing to speak to that amendment? Senator Lee, you're still recognized.
Sudos Masi, Madam Speaker, and I thank the retiring speaker for always trying to create a middle ground and bring us together to try to move forward. But again, I just want to emphasize that this measure provides only a 6-month time frame. So I would respectfully object to the amendment to the amendment.
There has been an objection to the amendment to the Paris Amendment. Senator Therese, on the amended as proffered by Senator Marsh-Taitano. On the amendment to the amendment.
Okay, I have no objection to that amendment. As feasible? No.
Anyone else? If not, there has been an objection. All those in favor of the Assistant Majority Leader's amendment to the Paris Amendment to add, comma, as is feasible, comma. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 3. Motion fails. On the proffered amendment, anyone else wishing to speak? There has been an objection. Not I will. Senator Therese, on the Paris Amendment.
Well, I very much appreciate the amendment that it points out that if we're talking about the aquifer and threats to the aquifer and stopping all development at certain parts of this aquifer in a 6-month period, that we should really get to the bottom of what the threats are. And so I appreciate that this amendment does say, gather information on all threats to the aquifer. Because unless we know what the threats are, stopping all development over it is a very broadened, preliminary assessment of the threat. The original bill had proposed that we stop all wells.
I apologize.
And now that's been...
Madam Speaker, just a point of information for the body. The amended version that has been accepted by our body does not indicate any, any changes to development. That was in the original measure, but I really want to caution my colleagues to focus on the bill as amended. And if you would like for me to reiterate just changes to the title, initially it was discussing where no production wells shall be installed and no development should occur. But now we are talking about the amended version that discusses the portion of the Northern Guam Lands aquifer wherein regulation and management of development shall occur. So just really want to
Point of
dispel
order, Madam
any kind
Speaker.
of misinformation, Madam Speaker.
I
and
can't
just wanna-
find an amended version of this bill.
Oh.
We're talking about the bill as introduced, right?
We are in a moment's recess, please. I'm going to take a moment's recess. Y minuto 35 la legislatura en Guam is back from recess. Senator Lee, on your point of information, if you can just clarify that point of information, is it as amended by the bill or amended on the floor?
Madam Speaker, I do just want to raise concern that it seems that maybe some of my colleagues don't have that amendment in front of them that passed without objection. And so I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what we're discussing here and that we're not bringing up the original bill. That's not what's being discussed right now. We're discussing this bill as amended. So
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Therese, you still have the floor.
I would, before I resume my talk that I was in the middle of debate on this floor
Senator,
amendment, I would
you
like
are
to
out
raise
of
a point
order.
of order, Madam Speaker.
Okay, then I will address
Yes.
you on your point of order.
My point of order is that I was
Thank you.
interrupted while I was speaking for
Senator-
information that was completely not relevant to what I was saying. I had already said the bill as amended, and then I talked about it. And then the sponsor stood up and started to talk about a bill, an amended bill, which there is none. And she created more confusion than there needed to
Senator-
be, Madam Speaker. It was not helpful at all. It was an interruption. And I just think we need to stop those. Madam
Senator,
Speaker.
please, you still have the floor. You may still proceed.
As I was saying, on the amendment, which says that we will gather information on all threats to the aquifer. I said that is only fair. If we are looking at a bill that is going to propose where development should be prohibited on Guam. And just as we learned in the original bill, Madam Speaker, I'm very clear on this. The original bill talked about prohibiting wells. And now we have amended it on the floor to remove the prohibition on wells in a conservation area that has not been established yet. But we're still talking about potentially affecting development in these areas. And I'm just saying, what we didn't know about wells, we don't know as well about all the threats to the aquifer. And that we're basing our actions today on a huge presumption that any kind of development is going to negatively affect our aquifer more than existing threats. And that, I think we need to really pause and take a look at. What are these existing threats? As one of the earlier speakers talked about, PFAS. When we talked about the bill on PFAS, they could not tell us, all these experts could not tell us the source of PFAS contamination. They could not put their finger on it. They couldn't tell you which area of Guam we need to stop doing anything on in order to keep that well up here in Ta'ut from being contaminated. Things like that. And so I'm just saying we are proposing a huge burden on people, especially people trying to build residences, and that we should, if we are going to consider anything, then consider all threats. And if they can solve those threats, that's what they should be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else wishing to speak on the Paris amendment? If not, Senator Paris, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I think it's really important to understand that our aquifer is a commons. And if we are to make sure that it is safe and protected, there's this talk about tragedy of the commons, right? We all partake in the commons, but who's really preserving and protecting it? And one of the challenges that we face today is that we live above our aquifer, which means any kind of pollutants can pretty much leach into it. And so the purpose of this amendment is really to take a broad look at what is impacting our aquifer so that we can prevent the tragedy of the commons. And how do we do that? It's about environmental protections, but it's also about ensuring that what we are doing above the aquifer is going to sustain us health-wise and economically and socially. So if we are to establish a task force for the sustainability of our island, it behooves us to take into account all the threats and all of our land use policies. I mean, Bureau of Statistics and Plans have these land use policies. How often are they enforced? How often are they complied with? And how long has it been updated? Since when was it updated? Does it need updating? These are all relevant questions to ensure the sustainability of our island, to ensure that our water is safe to drink. And I believe, whether it's, 6 months, it could be extended. I've been on several task forces where we ask for an extension. These are important questions that need to be addressed. And I only think that it will strengthen this legislation. And it would definitely provide something that, we need. We need these answers. We need the dialogue. And I think that, so by proffering this amendment, it's about preventing the tragedy of the commons and engaging everybody, all stakeholders. Because without everybody, it would not be as successful. Masi.
Thank you, Senator Paris. There has been an objection to the Paris amendment. All those in favor for Senator Paris's amendment, please signify by raising your hands. Motion fails. On the main motion, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Lee, you may, on the main motion, Senator?
On the bill, yes. So first of all, I just want to point out to those that are listening that NGLA, this Northern Guam Lens Aquifer, is actually, we've learned, extends from the Pago Bay Bridge north, the entire island from the Pago Bay Bridge north. And this already is, and we're talking about regulating it some more, which I understand and I approve. But it already is, and it should be, the most regulated area because of our aquifer. So I absolutely agree with that. We have a northern land use plan in place that helps us to regulate that use. We have laws already in existence regarding septic tanks, mandating you hook up to sewers, many different regulations, and ask anybody who's tried to build anything up there, even businesses, storage of hazardous materials, different things. They're very highly regulated. But, I don't object to looking at it some more, how we can protect our aquifer. I guess what perplexes me is, when I look at the list of those who are going to be on this task force, it's like that is their job. These are Government of Guam agencies, and every one of them has a mandate to protect our aquifer and plays a role in that. I wanted to, if the sponsor would yield, I have a couple of questions. So one is, in subsection C on page 3, it's section 2 of the bill, subsection C, it talks about, so this is a task force that shall be under the direction of the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, who shall serve as its chairperson. And subsection C says, he may extend participation in the task force to any member of the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer Technical Advisory Group to assist. So I just wanted to ask, who are the members of the Technical Advisory Group who are not members or proposed members of this task force?
Senator Lee, would you like to yield?
Sidosmasi, Madam Speaker. Some of those members include folks from the Northern Soil and Water Conservation District. There's a number of members of that board, and in addition, there are the mayors of these respective villages that have jurisdiction over the NGLA. So there's a handful of people that are involved in the Northern Guam Lens Aquifer Technical Advisory Group that aren't listed in this task force.
Thank you for the yielding by the sponsor, Madam Speaker. And yeah, I tried to look up this technical advisory group to see if we already have a technical advisory group for the Guam Lens Aquifer. Why aren't they compiling the information necessary, especially the information required in number 1 under the task force's duties, to determine which zone, area, or portion of the NGLA is in most need or could most benefit from protection from surface pollutants. It's kind of mind-blowing to think that WERI doesn't know that at this point, or any of these people. I think, together, they may know that already. I think we've talked about it in other hearings, which wells are facing contamination. Or if there's some other criteria, I guess I'd like to hear what is the criteria that we're looking for if it's not existing contamination or increasing contamination, as what we've heard. I tried to find this advisory group. All I could find was a group by the same name that was composed of, pursuant to an MOU between Guam Waterworks, Joint Region Marianas, NAVFAC Marianas, Naval Facilities Engineering Command, and USGIS. And of course, I think they added WERI. So yeah, I would very much like to know what, who all the members might be. So again, so back to this information, I think the information under D1 is critical. We do need to know which zone, area, or portion of this entire northern side of the island is in most need or could benefit from protection from surface pollutants. And we actually should say increased protection, because we do have some protections. And obviously, if the enforcement is not working, that might be the issue. That's what we found out with the septic tanks. And I think that when that information from number 1, the first requirement of this bill is to which areas on Guam need the most protection from surface pollutants, that is really the crux of it. And if that is available by anybody right now, that they should just send that out. They should share that with all these agencies listed here. We know that Bureau of Statistics and Plan, we just passed a law. I think we just overrode a law, Public Law 35-110, that mandated that the Bureau of Statistics and Plans was going to do a comprehensive land use plan, including conservation and other categories of public and private uses of land, including, regulations of use of land, including conservation in particular, a guide, the conservation, development, utilization of natural resources, including forests, soils, rivers, other waters, harbors, fisheries, coral reefs, wildlife, threatened and endangered species, minerals, and other natural resources, and it goes on and on. So we know they're tasked with that because they did the Northern Land Use Plan. And we tasked them to do another comprehensive plan. And so I just suspect that this information is already known. And if that is the case, why not just put that part out? Send that to us. Send that to them. Make sure everybody knows it. I know that when development comes up before the Guam Land Use Commission, the Bureau of Statistics and Plans is very active in pointing out what is the allowed use under the Northern Land Use Plan. So is the Department of Land Management. And which, concerns have been, tagged for those particular properties. So I think that should be the crux of this bill. There are other parts of this bill, for example, subsections 2 and 3, that are very much specific to talking about government land. So we want to find out, in number 1, which areas of Guam are should be protected, or would most benefit from protections. Yet, then we're only going to focus on the government parts of the government land within those areas. We're not going to stop, industrial rezoning in that area by this bill. We're not going to stop mineral extraction that takes us down closer to the aquifer. And I've seen some violations on the EPA's website recently that, for that exact purpose, that they were extracting without permits even. It doesn't protect us from anything. It just wants to focus us to Government of Guam land, which sounds, innocent. However, when I look at this, and I know that we have already reserved all Government of Guam land for particular use. Some of it is reserved for Department of Education, of course. We heard about those. There's land reserved for public health and mass transit. I'm sure that, maybe every agency has a little bit, but none of them has a lot. The one land that I think is also included in here, not specifically mentioned, is the Chamoru Land Trust land. And I very much object that if this bill is intending to control the use of Chamoru Land Trust land, Madam Speaker, the reason why it's not developed today is because we can't We can't get what they need to them. And I think it's wrong that if we're going to look at putting on top of the Chamorro Land Trust beneficiaries the additional burden of carrying the conservation areas for the entire island of Guam. Not today, Madam Speaker. I think, we've heard the previous chairperson of the Chamorro Land Trust tell us that is, of course, what they want to do. She was a land use planner, and she wants to make sure that they use agricultural land for agricultural leases, land that is not habitable for commercial leases, and land that is habitable for residential leases, which is their number one primary duty. I do have some floor amendments that I'd like to propose.
Please proceed.
All right. Madam Speaker, I'm getting a message that we're not live. Are we live? Let me see. Floor amendment 1.
We'll take a moment's recess for audio to adjust. Minute 85 na lang and Guahan is back from recess. Senator Chalayi, we are now live. You may proceed with your amendments.
Thank you very much. So the first amendment is on page 3. It's lines 3 to 9. So this affects subsection D1, and is simply adding the words "and why" to the end of the first task. So the first task of this task force is to produce a feasibility study that includes, number 1, which zone, area, or portion of the NGLA is most in need of or could most benefit from protection from surface pollutants, and why. I want to know why. Is it because it's already so contaminated, or is it because, there's something about how the water gets to the waterlands from that area that makes it extremely vulnerable, or whatever other reasons. And so I just think that would help us to, if this is intended to move forward with policy, then I think that the why would help us with the policy. Thank you.
There has been an amendment proffered by Senator Therese Chalayi. Anyone wishing to speak on it? If not, are there any objections? Are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator Therese, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks, my colleagues. So the second amendment is again on page 3. This one is to subsection 2. So subsection D2 in section 2 of the bill, line 11, page 3. So subsection 2 right now asks, who are the government, which of these lands that should be protected are owned by the government? That's the question. And I'm just asking, I'm changing that where they should know who are the owners of all the land that needs to be protected. I just think if they want to come up with good policy, that we should know all of those considerations, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Therese. On the amendment, anyone wishing to speak on it? If not, are there any objections? Senator Lee, you have the floor. You okay? Are there anyone wishing to speak on the amendment as proffered by Senator Therese? Senator Mary Torres, I will recognize you at this time.
Just a question to the proffer of the amendment.
Please state your question.
Would the wording of this to specifically identify the owners affect in any way the decision of the task force? I mean, does it matter? Because in one instance, it's just saying, are any of them owned by an agency or an instrumentality of the government? But the amendment proposes to say, to essentially say, tell us who the owners are, to identify the owners. So in terms of I mean, what is the net effect of changing it to be specific to the owners in terms of the task force? I don't see.
Thank you. Senator Therese, would you like to yield to the
Yes,
question?
and I thank my colleague for the question. It's just simply so that it's like I learned this in the historic preservation law. You know, a lot of our most valuable historic preservation sites are on private land, and the government still, you know, wants to know where those are and still be able to protect those. And if the owner is not going to protect them, then the government is authorized by law to go and try to protect them by either, you know, paying for it or making some other arrangement so that they will be protected, because that's the utmost, you know, goal. And so it looks to me like the goal here is also to do that. If it's to protect the aquifer and there are vulnerable sites, then we should know where they are, what uses are on them, and so that we can protect those vulnerable sites if necessary. I don't know how yet. That's what this task force is going to show us might be necessary. And so I just think they should know the whole big picture. Like, what is the use of creating a park if we have an industrial pollutant next door, right? And so I'm hoping that it all works together, and we need to just do that together. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Torres, does that help?
It does, Madam Speaker, but then, you know, I would object to the amendment then, because in the simple read of the title, this Bill 405 is an act relative to establishing a task force to explore the feasibility of creating a groundwater conservation area on property that is owned by the government of Guam. So it's very specific to that mission, as I understand it, unless we've amended it to be other than what the title reads. But in the simple read of the title, it's to establish a groundwater conservation area over government-owned property. So, you know, once you establish that it's government-owned, then there's a plan ahead. So the question is it government-owned or is it not government-owned? It doesn't matter who owns it. The question is it government-owned or not government-owned? So I think, in my opinion, the language as stated in the bill is sound. It's consistent with what the objectives of the title were in the bill. So, and that's why I asked, does it matter who owns it? And the question should be no, so long as it's not the government or is the government. That's really the simple question. And the language right now will determine that simple answer. Is it or isn't it owned by the government of Guam? So I would object then on that simple rationale.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Anyone else on the main amendment? Senator Paris, I will recognize you at this time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think, yeah, the intent of this bill is to protect our groundwater resources. And, you know, if these areas that are considered to be critical to that and should not be, let's say, owned by the government, I believe, you know, it still, you know, offers an opportunity for these landowners to become stewards. So there are programs in place that would promote that. And whether it is, you know, owned by the government or not, I think it's still within the government's interest to extend that opportunities to ensure the groundwater is protected. So I stand in support of this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Anyone else on the amendment? If not, Senator Terlahi, would you like to close?
I think the former speaker has said it clearly. I'll end there.
Thank you, Senator Therese. On the amendment as proffered by Senator Therese, there has been an objection. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion fails. Senator Clint, I understand you have a, hold on. Do you have another amendment, Senator Therese?
Yes, I do. I hope you can see this one. It should be in regards to subsection 10. It's to add a new 10 to 2A. There's a new member, just to add the legislative committee chairperson with jurisdiction on environmental matters to this task force.
On that amendment, are there any objections? Anyone wishing to speak? There being no objections, motion carries. Senator Clint?
I have one more amendment, Madam Speaker. It is,
I don't have it. Oh, sorry, I'll take that back.
okay, it should be on page 3, line 11, subsection D2.
Senator Therese, I don't have it.
I think it was sent, it's just not up in the drive. Yeah. Pardon?
Senator Therese, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. So this is again on page 3, line 11, amendment to subsection D2 in section 2 of the bill. So 2 right now says that the task force shall determine, are any of the properties which overlay the above identified zones, areas or portions of the NGLA owned by any agency or instrumentality of the government of Guam. So my amendment would be to exclude those lands owned by the Chamoru Land Trust. Just as private property is being excluded from this study. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On the amendment, anyone wishing to speak? Are there any objections? Are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none, motion carries. Senator, you have one more?
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Clint, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Because of the amendment that just passed, adding another member to the task force, I'm going to need to request some time to change my amendment once again. The reasoning is because if I add my member to the task force, it'll be an even number. If I could just take a quick recess to determine whether or not I need to change my amendment or not. Thank you.
Moments recess. Y minuto 85 na legislature ng Guam is back from recess. Senator Rogel, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Okay, my amendment is to add another member to the task force, and it would add a new number. But if I could have also allow legal to make technical corrections, because originally I had it numbered 11, but because of a previous amendment, it would now have to be number 12. To A, Section 2 of the bill to read, the President of the Guam Association of Realtors or his or her designee.
On that amendment, anyone wishing to speak? Senator Lee, I will recognize you.
Sudos Masi, Madam Speaker, I just rise in support of this amendment. I want to thank the proffer of this amendment as well as the chairman, Senator Joseph Augustine, who held several iterations on other versions or other bills in this suite, and members from the Guam Association of Realtors were present at each one, and so I know that they have a vested interest in what is discussed, and I just want to make sure that a representative is present and giving their point of view. Sudos Masi.
Thank you. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Therese, you're recognized.
Yes, I just want to acknowledge, I agree with this amendment. I support this amendment very much. In fact, just this morning, I received on my WhatsApp chat, correspondence from Gina Campos, one of the realtors, very active in this discussion as to, land use regulation and septic tank regulations and she wrote to us or to me, and I think now that she's put it up on Facebook as well, but she said, 405-35 groundwater conservation area. This bill at face value appears to be a noble cause, and it is hard to say I disagree with the concept. The issue I do have is the timeline and the designated people to explore these issues. These are critical key players in our government. We do have a crisis on our hands, but it's not currently the aquifer of northern Guam. The concerns of the northern aquifer have been in place for quite a while. Based on the actions of a few of our senators, it appears to me they have lost sight of what is important to many in our community. Lost jobs, businesses closing, tourism that may not return for another year, shutdowns. Our children have been out of school since March. The hospital situation needs addressing immediately. We currently have up to 18,000 people unemployed, and that situation is an emergency. We have rising housing prices in the rental and purchase market due to issues with worker visas. We cannot always look to the federal government to solve our issues. It will take planning to get us out of this mess. The officials designated to participate in the GCA may better serve our community if they focus on these issues. I'm not saying the aquifer is not important. I'm saying our people are more important. Protect them first. And so I know that the realtors are concerned with the aquifer. In fact, I think we've got some very helpful recommendations from them in regards to, many of the bills that have come before us, especially in regards to, regulation. So, we want to do right by regulation, but they've pointed out to us some of the unintended consequences of that. And so because this bill, again, talks about regulation of the development in certain parts of Guam, and right now we're talking about the whole northern until they limit that down, I think it's very important that we talk to people who are helping people to find residential areas to live. Thank you.
Thank you. On the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? Seeing or hearing none. Motion carries. Senator Ruggiero, you still have the floor. You done? You still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have no further amendments, but I did want to speak on the main motion.
You may proceed.
Thank you. I'd just like to speak in favor of the motion. I mean, the main motion, the bill itself. I think it's a good bill. I think it's a good idea to bring together the experts from the different agencies. And yes, these experts should be looking over these things each in their own respective agencies. You've got the Environmental Protection Agency, you've got the Waterworks Authority, the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, Department of Agriculture. And yes, they all have expertise in those areas, and they are supposed to be doing this already and sort of figuring out how to protect our groundwater and our northern aquifer. But as is often the case, I think most people can attest to this in some form or another. We often see in GovGuam agencies will sort of operate in their own silo. One agency doesn't know what the other agency is doing, etc. Sometimes this happens within agencies. One division of an agency will be operating within its own little silo, separate and apart from the other divisions of that particular agency. So that's why I think it's a good idea to bring together all of these different agencies so they can all share the information that they may not be sharing already. You know, the old saying that a lot of times in government, the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. Well, let's get all the correct hands together and let them talk and let them figure this out. So with that, I support the measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clint. Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Lee, you may close.
Sudasmasi, Madam Speaker and colleagues. Madam Speaker, our government must continue to tap into our local experts to better plan for our aquifer's future, and that's really the goal behind Bill 405-35 COR, which again establishes a task force to inform land use decisions over the NGLA by exploring the establishment of groundwater conservation areas. We must be able to all come together and figure out what uses will help our island and what types of development should be restricted or further regulated on these properties. And again, this bill requires legislative action on recommendations that are made by this task force. This measure has so much potential, positive potential. Policies resulting from this group's work could lead to the creation of new public parks, new research programs, and the Department of Agriculture mentioned during this bill's public hearing that millions are already available to invest into recognized conservation areas. I've been saying this repeatedly, but this incomparable natural asset is too important to ignore. It supplies nearly 80% of our drinking water. It will be the reason that Guam has grown to where we are today, and it will sustain us into the future if we commit to enacting every protection that we can, and by supporting expert-driven solutions. Madam Speaker, there's a theory that our island's name, Guahan, is derived from Guaha Ham, meaning we have. It's a poignant reminder that within the Pacific and even the world, this tiny speck of land just happens to be everything, just happens to have everything needed to grow century after century and to sustain our people. Whether you believe it was by chance or by divine design, the bountiful blessings that we have attracted tribes and empires to this very island since people first began exploring what was beyond their horizons. And Madam Speaker, we who are fortunate and privileged enough to inherit this place should be true stewards of what it makes Guam so unique. One of the best, most special things that we have is this perfect system of limestone filtered water. Once our aquifer is contaminated, though, the cost to produce that much drinking water will completely disrupt everything. A decrease in available drinking water will shrink our economy, will devastate sustainable population levels. We could have GWA's version of load shedding. Rates could rise enough to cause a generational brain drain. We could gain a reputation among tourists as having dirty, unsafe tap water. But if we continue to step up protections on this awesome resource that we have on Guam, acknowledging that it was given to us, gifted to us, we won't have to live through this. Madam Speaker, many times in this body, I take a step back and I look at the measures that are placed before us and I think, you know what? What would happen if we didn't act on this? What would happen if we just did absolutely nothing? And there are concerns from members of our community that, our body isn't considering this or isn't considering that. But I think over the course of the last week, we've shown that we can care about our community's public health. We can care about direct aid for our citizens. In the same time that we're also caring about solid waste and decreasing illegal dumping. In the same way, we can also care about this. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. These are all of our priorities, Madam Speaker, and if we do not act on this today, it's going to be a crisis situation. In one of the public hearings on another measure, Captain Bearden from the Guam Environmental Protection Agency showed us a map of our island neighbors in Saipan. And he showed us exactly the crisis situation, the challenges that they have with their water supply source. It's a cautionary tale, Madam Speaker, and we need to do what we can to protect our resource here. Let's not wait until it's a crisis situation. Let's not wait until we're on the brink of contamination of 80% of our water supply. Keeping this aquifer viable will mean that Guam can continue to provide her people with what we have had for thousands of years and for the millennium to come. And with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to place Bill 405-35 COR as amended on the floor into the voting file.
On the motion, without any objection, hearing or seeing none, motion carries. Assistant Majority Leader, can you put us into recess till Monday at 10 a.m.?
Can I have just a minute's recess just to confer with my colleagues?
Set. We'll take a moment's recess. y minuto 35 na legislatura in Guam is back from recess. Senator Lee, I'm going to recognize you as Committee on Rules Chair.
Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker, and I just rise to a point of information. Madam Speaker, this hall will host the inaugural session of the Guam Youth Congress tomorrow. It will require an entire reconfiguration of our session hall, and recessing now will limit the need for overtime or flexible work hours, considering that if many of our central operations employees are already working more than 40 hours this week, given our ongoing session. And so we just want to be conscious of that. We are under budget constraints and time constraints, Madam Speaker, so I just wanted to give that rationale and that information to the body. Thank
Do you
you.
want to move to recess to 10
A
o'clock Monday
point of
morning?
information, and
On a point.
I am the one who's supposed to do procedural motions.
Senator, I addressed
Point of
you
information,
on the
we
motion.
also only have 3 bills left.
You are out of order. I am going to say, I asked the Committee on Rules Chair, does she have a proffered motion based on her statement as the Committee on Rules Chair? That is allowed by the presider. I am asking Senator Lee, is there a motion to proffer?
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Senator Lee.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
On the point of order, Senator Therese.
Yeah, I think you interrupted Senator Marsh Taitano, who is our acting majority leader,
Yes, I
when
understand.
she was speaking and allowed for another speaker.
Senator Therese,
And I think she should
based
be allowed
on the
to finish.
announcement and what is before us today, I am asking the Committee on Rules Chair, does she have an amendment to proffer? Do you have an amendment to proffer, Senator Lee? I mean, a motion to proffer.
Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker, based on that, I just want to amend what I had said previously. Recessing now will limit the need for time for overtime or flexible work hours, and this event will require an entire reconfiguration of our building, not just the session hall, but also the public hearing room to accommodate this event. So again, Madam Speaker, I just offer that up to the body, and I'd like to make a motion that we recess till Monday at 10 a.m.
On that motion, we are in
Objection.
recess.
Objection, Madam